The department is responsible for administering a law that's called the Natural Resources Protection Act. And as far back as 1988, the legislature thought about the issue of what resources are important to the state. Obviously, Maine is a beautiful place. So the legislature thought and said, well, if we need to provide for additional protection for special places, what are they? And they listed high mountain areas and seabird nesting areas and coastal sand dunes and significant vernal pools, as well as a number of other habitats. And they crafted a law back in 1988 that said these are special places, and the DEP needs to be responsible for writing regulations and issuing permits for people that are doing things in or near these resources.
And so the legislature came to the Natural Resource Departments and said, we want you to define a subset of vernal pools to protect, and we want you to develop a realistic strategy for how to do that. And that was the marching orders for a group that assembled called the Vernal Pool Working Group in the mid-90s that was assembled from a diverse coalition of agency folks, NGOs, private stakeholder entities, and together we came up with a definition of vernal pools.
The wrinkle was, for a number of these habitats, the legislature said, we want you to identify them, put them on a map, and once you've done that, then you can write a regulation and begin issuing permits. And there was a very long period of time where the maps could not be created by the state agencies. And that was really a resource question.
This definition took over 10 years to develop, and it was really because the working group set a high bar for itself. They said, we want this to be a science-based definition. We don't want it to be a judgment call. We want the wildlife values themselves to identify what is a high-value vernal pool. And secondly, we want it to be realistic and something that can be implemented on the ground by the development community, by landowners, by agencies, etc.
And so what happened back in 2004 was a conversation with the legislature where we said, it's been a long time that we've been thinking about vernal pools, and the biologists have been looking at all these different pools, and they've reached a few decisions. And what they said was only those pools that are biologically significant, the ones that are being used by the critters as habitat and rearing areas. Let's protect those. And if you happen to have a vernal pool that dries up in the spring, but it's not used by a blue-spotted salamander, it doesn't need a regulation. So what does that mean? Well, they created a definition of a significant vernal pool.
In discussions that I've had with Department of Environmental Protection, it's DEP that administers the rule under the Natural Resources Protection Act. They've made it pretty clear to date that they can't think of a single project, actually, that's ever been denied as a result of a significant vernal pool being present. However, what it does do is it enables the DEP to have some oversight on how a project is laid out in a manner that will avoid and minimize impacts to the sensitive portions of the vernal pool. And those sensitive areas are the pool depression itself, and then a critical life zone, a concentration area around the pool, which biologically that zone extends hundreds of feet, even over 1,000 feet for some species. In terms of the legislation, that zone ends at 250 feet. 25% of that 250-foot life zone can be used for some kind of development activity or for putting in a driveway to access a subdivision or new residential development, what have you. So there is flexibility around how that partially forested life zone is maintained.
It's a very common question that people have. People are concerned, how is this going to affect my property values? I just had somebody call me the other day because they're interested in purchasing a piece of property that has a potential vernal pool on it. And they wanted to know if it was a vernal pool and how that should affect what they offer for the property. And of course, I can't answer that question. I can only say if the pool has been surveyed and what we found. But those types of questions are pretty common. Even our town assessor, you know, the assessors are used to looking at different qualities of a house and a landscape to put a value to a piece of property, and now this is a new component.
You know, in 30 years dealing with municipal governments, I know of one development that was not successful. In fact, the vernal pool was used as a tool for the opponents of that development to successfully stop the continued plans of the development, and in fact resulted in a loss to the developer of having to move the property, sell the property at a significant loss. In retrospect, if vernal pools in that particular community had been mapped in cooperation with that community could have prevented all of this from happening in the interest of the developer. It would have been a totally different story. But because the pools were unknown on that property, and they weren't discovered until they were seriously looked for. An educated community, knowing where these pools are, would have changed the complexion entirely of that situation. They would have been a very positive place to do business, in fact. Thank you very much for telling me I can't do this. Or thank you for me not spending all this money in the design of this development, where if I'd known those pools were there, I could have designed around it, maintained the integrity of the resource, and still been able to capture my investment.
Now that they're regulated at the federal and state level, we need to know where they are and where they're not. So when I'm doing my economic development planning, we have to be careful of locating in the right areas. If we have an area that has a lot of vernal pools, we may look at another area, or we may look at those really vernal pools.
Given that the legislation allows for the state to accept vernal pool data from trained citizen scientists, the University of Maine and Maine Audubon initiated a community-based vernal pool mapping project.
And as I'm panning through the town, if I see a feature that looks like a vernal pool, I can digitize it in this program. And as I'm digitizing the pools, I'm also collecting information in GIS, putting in such information as the pool type, which is maybe a forested wetland pool, a shrub pool, maybe an emergent pool, or an open water pool. I'm able to put that into the database as well, so I can see the exact boundaries of the pool as they show up on here.
And this has been a very valuable program for the town. We've been able to link all the data, the photographs, everything to each vernal pool here in the community. And it'll be a very valuable tool for our planning board and our zoning board going forward as applications come before those boards to develop in different areas of the town. So we'll be using this data for years to come.
One of the other things that they will do is overlay the vernal pools onto property tax maps. And in this way they can find the owner of the land on which the pool is located. And in fact, this is a very critical step whereby they have to contact the landowner ahead of time in order to get permission to have volunteers go to the site and check these pools in the spring.
With time, this data set will increase in value because we have a baseline snapshot of egg mass data in species presence now, but imagine how the value of that will increase with time as land use changes across the landscape, as climate change begins to unfold, and we can use some of this data to retrospectively look at what some of these changes might have done to these same pools if we revisit them in the future and compare notes with our baseline data set.
So what we have here is a view of the town of Reedfield with a backdrop of a true color aerial photo mosaic. And it's a fairly accurate photo map of the town. And the yellow layer here is the town's parcel data. You can see each lot, and the town probably has links of those lots to the actual owner information.
So now when there is a subdivision proposal in front of the planning board, the Conservation Commission can pull out the map, pull up the map on their computer and say, wow, look, there are 3 vernal pools in that proposed subdivision, and we can come to a planning board meeting and say these vernal pools need to be considered.
They can say that this particular pool here is located on this lot, and they'll have the information for the owner in order to contact them.
And also when somebody wants to develop their property, maybe just put a house in the back lot or something, the code enforcement officer is going to be able to pull up the information, and if somebody's asking for a permit, they'll know that there's a vernal pool on that property. So it's going to be very useful information for not only the planning board and the conservation commission, but all the property owners as well.
It's sometimes felt as though all vernal pools are now protected under this rule, and that's simply not the case. The definition is codified in statute. It is very transparent and consistent in how it's applied. You basically have to meet very specific scientific criteria for a pool to be eligible. And as it turns out, it is a minority of vernal pools in Maine that are significant vernal pools.
And what the other decision was, well, if it's going to cost us, for example, $10 million to create these maps and put everything on paper ahead of time, what's another way to do this? And what the agencies said, including DEP and IF&W, we said to the legislators, well, there's a lot of understanding about vernal pools now, and we know that you can go out in the field, and with this definition of a significant vernal pool, it's very easy to identify them. Let's create a simple process for a citizen, a professional, really anybody who has a little bit of training. They can go out and look at a pool and say, is this a pool that needs a permit?
What's the definition of a significant vernal pool?
Presence of fairy shrimp. So if there are 40 or more red frog egg masses present, 20 or more spotted salamander egg masses present in the pool, or 10 or more blue spotted. And the reason why 10 or more blue spotted is because typically in pools that have blue spotted egg masses in them, there are hundreds. The idea was to go out with the municipal data form that you have in front of you and determine whether or not remotely identified potential vernal pools were in fact vernal pools based on identifying whether or not egg masses or fairy shrimp were present. At this point, I'd like to show you a 5-minute video on egg mass identification to bring us into thinking about looking for and identifying and counting egg masses.
A little over a year ago, the town of Cumberland was asked to participate in a vernal pool project that was going on throughout the southern area of the state. My initial reaction was that we didn't want to participate. It sounded like a lot of work. Then our volunteers came to see me. Penny and Sally said, you must do this. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our guests. We are very excited to be here this morning. And my background is in civil engineering, so I'm a make it black, don't look back, pave it to save it type of guy. And this was kind of a stretch for me to get involved with this type of program. But what I saw the value was that the town would know if these vernal pools were actually vernal pools and wouldn't put the burden on our commercial businesses as well as our residents to know or not know if this was truly a vernal pool.
Maine Audubon's mission is to conserve wildlife and wildlife habitat and to engage people in education, conservation, and action, and to support getting community members involved in conservation. And this is just a perfect kind of project for that. As you saw here today, we have every age range involved in the project, and people are really enthusiastic to be able to participate in something like this.
I helped to organize the effort to inventory over 200 potential vernal pools in Cumberland. And I will say it's quite an effort, and this is the second year of our study, and we were a little bit better organized this year. I think last year we realized that it does take quite a bit of time to pull it all together.
Sometimes people just don't know. They don't know that if they fill in that pool, they might not have wood frogs next year, and they might actually appreciate wood frogs. They might think of it as a sign of spring, but they haven't made the connection between the pool and the frogs.
Next, we also have the property owner names and their phone numbers. Now, every property owner has received a letter explaining the project and that we're going to be coming out, and they have either agreed or disagreed. So the blocked properties we will not be visiting.
Well, we decided to send out letters to all the landowners and only go out on properties where the landowners had given permission for us to do that.
We have about 35 landowners, probably about 70 vernal pools that were restricted by landowners that really just didn't want us on their property.
By letting people go on their land, you know, they were afraid of what might happen if they would be regulated in some way that they didn't want to be.
We're hoping that as people see that it isn't as intrusive as some believe it is, that they'll share with their neighbors that it wasn't that bad, it was good to get the information, and they'll have a place to come to town hall to look at the information.
Today we had over 45 people here today, a bunch of them kids. I'm going to take my kids out this afternoon to do the pools that I've been assigned to, and it really is it's a fun kind of family thing to do as well.
They look like little paint flecks on the bottom of the pool, like often in little clumps. You know, you don't usually see one alone, but you'll see 5, 6, 10, 15 in a little cluster along. You know, I have a little picture along a stick like this. Polarized sunglasses really help for finding spermatophores. But what these spermatophores mean is that you're at the pool too soon to see salamander egg masses, and that you should return later and look again for egg masses.
This just seemed like a way to be a little bit a steward of the land in some very small way, along with community members. So it was a real community project. And the part I liked about it was getting so many people involved, people who weren't on the Conservation Commission, just people from here and there and all around town. And plus it seemed like it would be fun to get to wear hip boots.
Yeah, right.
Vernal pools, they are a small body of water where lots of wildlife live, like salamanders, frogs, toads, fairy shrimp, lots of plants, lots of amphibians, and no fish. It's because fish would eat the amphibians up.
One of the reasons that I think people get so excited about working on vernal pools is because they're just the kind of size where you can really see what's going on and really feel like you can make a difference in collecting the information and you know how it's going to be used. And so you know you can go out and spend 15 minutes or an hour in one vernal pool and you see it's teeming with life. Most people would drive by a pool like this or walk by in the woods and think, oh, you know, it's just a little puddle, but actually there's all kinds of invertebrates swimming around in there. There's all these frogs and salamanders and turtles that live in there. Some of them are breeding in there. Some of them are just coming to rest or feed in there. But it's this incredible biodiversity all in this one little area.